Honorable Dr. Scotland, Speaker of the Parliament, Honorable Madam Chief Justice, Acting, Ambassadors Joseph and George, senior government officials, Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of Guyana, my fellow citizens, welcome to the second conversation on law and society, a series of conversations that is intended to help us as the University of Guyana, Guyana's national university, as the premier tertiary institution of our country, insight, research, and reflection, debate, and discussion about issues that are current and relevant to our development as a nation. These conversations are intended to examine the legal ramifications of social issues and the social implications of legal issues. And there is no other issue than the borders of Guyana that require reflection and research, debate and discussion, designed to incite in us a pledge of loyalty to our country and to the ideals and ideas that we hold dear, that we share, and that bind our 6 peoples in 10 regions with a checkered history and past together. And so I'm delighted to welcome you this afternoon to the second conversation. I'm delighted that in our presence we have school children, soon to be adults, senior students from some of our high schools around the country. We often say that the future of our country, the future of our church, the future of our society, the future of university lies in the hands of those who are younger than most of us. And by inviting students to these conversations, to these activities, we hope that we can pass the torch to them seamlessly. Not just a torch of government, but to light in them a passion and a commitment for our country and the ideals we share. So the students of the high schools around the country, welcome especially. We have friends who have come from non-government institutions, and NGOs often pride themselves on their ability to hold the feet of government to the fire. And so we're glad that you're here this afternoon, and we hope that you'll hold and continue to hold the feet of government to the fire. I dare say the government will hold the feet of the NGOs to the fire too, but that's a conversation for another day. We're delighted that there are people in this room who for decades have thought about the importance of our borders and have worked assiduously, in many instances unknown to the general public, in long meetings to sort the issue around the controversy of our borders, to sort these out and get them resolved once and for all. And the announcement by the UN Secretary General just 2 days ago could not have come at a more opportune moment for us to remind ourselves about the issues and why this controversy still reigns, and what shall we as a nation do about it. So I'm delighted that we have experts in our midst. I'm delighted that we have ministers of the government in our midst, and they are charged with ensuring that our borders remain safe. I hope we have people from the uniformed forces. I hope we have those people who put their lives on the line so that our borders can be safe. And so we're here together as a nation, and I'm delighted on behalf of the 10th Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of Guyana to welcome you to this occasion. borders? Are they boundaries? Are they barriers? Or are they bridges? Do we have 3 borders or 4? Or there's a 5th border in our mind when we think about the people beyond the shores of the Atlantic? I hope we have a vibrant conversation this afternoon. I hope we can disagree a little bit, but I hope that we all leave here energized and further impassioned about protecting our borders. If you know the song, Not a Blade of Grass, we'll be singing it towards the end. Just the chorus. We shan't be inflaming any passions. We shall do it nicely. We shall do it elegantly. But it's one of our favorite songs, and why not, when we get together to talk about our borders, should we not sing Not a Blade of Grass? I'm delighted to introduce to you the 4 persons who will lead us through this conversation today. In your program, you'll see their bios, and I invite you to just take a moment to glance at it, take it home, and reflect on who they are. In the order in which they will present, we have Ambassador Keith George, CCH, who currently serves as Guyana's ambassador, extraordinary and plenipotentiary to Suriname. I hope the students in our midst understand what extraordinary and plenipotentiary means. And Ambassador, now is an opportunity to explain to all of us what extraordinary and plenipotentiary means. Following Ambassador George, we have Ambassador, I dare say retired but still super active, Cedric Joseph, CCH. And as you can see, Ambassador Joseph and Ambassador George have done human service in our foreign service, in diplomacy, working both visibly and behind the scenes on matters of state. Following these 2 ambassadors, Major General retired Joseph Singh will present. Major General is one of our country's favorite people. And as I read his bio again, I was struck by the diversity of positions he has held, because I've always thought of Major General Singh as the Chief of Staff of the Guyana Defense Force. And I've learned that Major General Singh goes far, far beyond the Chief of Staff of the Guyana Defense Force and the Special Assistant to the President of Guyana, a position he held between 2011 and 2017. And then the person who will moderate the conversation after those presentations is Ms. Paulette Henry. Although Ms. Henry is a colleague of mine at the University of Guyana, she's not here today because of that. The reason that I asked Ms. Henry to moderate the conversation is because she chairs the board of the Commission of Lands and Survey. And I think that there's no better person to help us keep the focus. Before all of that, we've started a tradition at the University of Guyana to introduce a bit of the arts in our activities. And so before that conversation, we'll have a bit of history in drama from some students from the National Drama School. It is my distinct honor at this moment to ask my boss, the 10th Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of Guyana, Professor Ivelaw Lloyd Griffith, to deliver his opening remarks. Thank you so much.
Good evening. Let's try it again. Good evening. Oh, it's just sorrowful response. One more time. Good evening. That is a much better response. We started this series last year in a very powerful, vibrant way with a conversation about one of our icons, now dead, in the judiciary, J.O.F. Haynes. And those of you who were able to be in that hall at Hermitston Lodge, or those of you who were able to follow us on the web, will know that that was a powerful experience of learning things about an individual some of whom individuals in this room and the room then may have heard about, but did not know enough about. It was such a powerful presentation and discourse that Justice Courtney Abell, who delivered the presentation, having done extensive research and having written a manuscript of more than 100 pages, I intend to invite Justice Abell to submit that research for publication through the University of Guyana Press. We need to be able to extend the perimeter of the knowledge from these conversations to fora elsewhere, to people and places elsewhere. And so I'm hoping and I anticipate that this second conversation will be just as edifying, will be just as spirited, will lead to some results enabling us to take the body of knowledge we have here to places beyond Theatre Guild, to places beyond where you are looking and joining us on the web. But ladies and gentlemen, I want to remind us of something that we all know, but sometimes we take for granted. These events just don't happen. They take organization, they take planning, they take execution by people on and off our campus. And so I want to invite you to join me in a thunderous appreciation for Dr. Barbara Reynolds and her team that put this together. Putting this together, as I said, takes not only on-campus actors, but off-campus actors. And when we hear the vote of thanks from the president of our student society, we'll hear some of the individuals and organizations off-campus who are deserving of recognition because of their contribution to the success. As I thought of what I might frame my 2 minutes remarks around, I decided to go to 6 short sentences by someone who served not only in the diplomatic arena, but in the policy arena, the defense policy arena in the United States for a while. I decided to go to some words by a gentleman called Donald Rumsfeld when he was Secretary of Defense of the United States. And this is what Donald Rumsfeld said that I commend to you, and I'll show you how it is relevant to this conversation. He said, "There are known knowns. These are things we know that we know. There are known unknowns. That is to say, there are things that we know we don't know. But they also are unknown unknowns. Things that we know we don't know." The subject of this conversation about borders, whether they are bridges or boundaries, falls into that category. The reality is, I suspect that if you were to ask any Guyanese citizen, do you know about the territorial controversy involving Venezuela? Yes, know it. But what exactly do you know about it? Not sure. Known unknowns. Maybe there's some things that you don't know that you don't know. And I think the opportunity is ours to enable our perimeter of knowledge about the known to be expanded, to learn some things that we did not even know we did not know. And we could not have had a better conversation group to lead us to extend the boundaries of the known, the boundaries of the known unknown, and the boundaries of the unknown unknown. As Dr. Reynolds remarked, This conversation was planned for today long before the announcement 2 days ago. But it is an opportunity not only for us to have a conversation, things that we know and things that we don't know and things that we don't even know we don't know, once and forget it. We have got an obligation because of what will be happening to our nation, with our nation, on the issue of the controversy with Venezuela. We have an obligation to extend the perimeter of the known and the known unknowns. And so I thought, why don't we begin that process of leaving with you? You'll see a 2-page. I was looking early this week at the Department of Public Information bulletin that comes out every night, and they had a very concise timeline. And I thought it might be useful to just share this. So when you leave here, you can take something and maybe be incentivized to find out something about any one of these bullets. Obviously, the Department of Public Information could not put everything that is eligible on a 2-pager. And if I myself were writing this, I would add a critical milestone, the Protocol of Port of Spain, which is the basis for so many other things that have happened. But ladies and gentlemen, our university intends to be part of that educating about known unknown, and unknown unknowns. And so yesterday I established a small working group looking at how we might, in partnership with 2 ministries that I will not name here as yet because I have not spoken to the ministers, and a media enterprise, we have an obligation to educate our citizens in ways we have not been doing for a while. You know, I was saying to the working group when we assembled yesterday, my first visit to Venezuela in 1981, I was struck by the frequency with which their national anthem is played. It is part of a broader educational, a part of a broader patriotic, one might also even say jingoism. We in Guyana have been lax in enabling our citizens to have that sense of patriotism and to know much about the territories, about the controversies. If you go to Caracas or any province, any state in Venezuela, you will find in the educational project at all levels a discussion about what they call la zona en reclamación. If you go to a Venezuela map at any of the embassies, you will find not only Venezuela as the world knows it, but you will find the claimed territory as la zona. We need to have an intentional approach to enabling and using this episode, using this moment of our pushing, hopefully to finality, the controversies resolution to the International Court of Justice. So I welcome the opportunity to have the partnership that we shall be developing with some ministries and other agencies. But I also welcome, coming back to something that DVC Reynolds said, I welcome hearing from NGOs that want to be part of this educational project. This is something that we've got to do not on an episodic basis, but we've got a plan for a longer haul. So welcome to a conversation about things that are known, conversation about things that are known unknowns, and conversation about things that are unknown unknowns. Welcome.
then. A night as black as my hair is my dead hair. Glowing with your white skin in the blackness of the night. Murdering in the blackness of the night. My children, I never see their face again. Because we are simply running. And I sink into them. Gunfire and smoke were filling the air on the daylight. So I swim down and into the earth. When the iron swords and clutching the roots of the people, I with the water spirit covering me for 8 minutes and 8 minutes.
Is the death of the white woman not something to celebrate? We should let her go back to the white man, bend over and create white babies who will most likely come and burn the great home. We first to the ground. Why don't we do to this white lady exactly what she should be able to do?
Peter, think about this. She's a woman. She didn't do anything to you. I think your father is right. This is something the white man did. Don't be like them. Let me go, please. Please. Help me.
Do you see how treacherous they are? Even if they save the life, they will still cut your throat.
Let me go. Help me. I have to leave, please.
You deserve this, Mara. You who've been in love with Kai since you was children, even after the white man took you, and you still try to protect this white trash. And now you beg me to save you? This is what has happened when you trust white people.
They keep coming! They keep coming! Year after year after year, they keep coming. Poisoning our waters, burning our trees. Who will tell our stories? Sliding over walls, snakes, infringing on our land with arms held in their bloody hands. Who will stop them? Who will tell our stories? Who will speak of the past? We are not here. We are not here. I see all these faces, but I do not see the faces of our people. We are not here. We are not here. We are not here. We are not here.
Good evening, everyone. While my microphone is being set up, I just wanted to say that I think this is a very good segue to perhaps make an appeal for our National Archives, perhaps, to get to the level that we would like to see it. Not only about the documents, but also in relation to the visuals. Honourable Ministers of Government, Speaker of the National Assembly, Vice Chancellor of the University of Guyana, other faculty members, officials of the Government of Guyana, colleagues from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I think Deputy Vice Chancellor is a very, very good strategist She knew very well that if I spoke last, since I'm speaking about Suriname, this room will be empty, given what has just been announced in relation to Venezuela. I do not intend to take a lot of time, but as you will see, I'm looking at the Guyana-Suriname border from the perspective of law and diplomacy. I will briefly identify the claims of the Republic of Suriname. I'll briefly state the agreements between the United Kingdom and the Netherlands between 1929 and 1939 in relation to the boundaries of Guyana and Suriname. I'll identify some applicable case law relating to historical efforts at the establishment of international boundaries. I'll examine the award of the arbitral tribunal constituted pursuant to Article 287 and in accordance with Annex 7 of the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea. That was handed down by the tribunal on the 17th of September 2007. That is the Maritime Boundary Award between Guyana and Suriname. And finally, I'll make some closing observations in relation to the issue of our boundaries with the Republic of Suriname as bridges and not barriers. The claims of the Republic of Suriname. I think we all know that Suriname claims the New River Triangle. New River Triangle here, which is approximately 6,000 square miles. Suriname also claims sovereignty, not just jurisdiction. The difference being, of course, all their laws apply in the river, and that use of that river is subjected to the rules and regulations of the Republic of Suriname. And that is from the mouth of the river to its source. The agreements between the United Kingdom and the Netherlands between 1929 and 1939 in relation to the boundaries. First and foremost, it must be recognized that while there was a treaty that was drafted in 1929 that was not signed, that treaty did not exist that treaty did not exist in isolation. Between 1929 and 1936, the British and the Dutch exchanged several notes verbals and agreed on exactly where the frontier between Dutch Suriname and British Guyana would be. Based on those understandings, agreements, it was agreed that Guyana will have ownership over the River Triangle, Suriname will have jurisdiction over the Quarantine River, Guyana will have user rights over that river. The point of on where the point of reference for the territorial sea boundary would be, the point of origin of territorial sea boundary, a territorial sea boundary of 3 nautical miles, and a territorial sea boundary that is on a direction or azimuth of 10 degrees. I will show you the maps as we proceed as to where those issues are. Suriname takes the view that that draft that was prepared in 1939 based on the pre-agreement between 1929 and 1936, Suriname takes the view that that draft, nor its provisions, singularly or collectively, has no legal relevance. The question is Suriname correct? To answer that question, I propose to look at some applicable case law relating to historical efforts at the establishment of international boundaries. One of the first 2 things we need to recognize is that judgments, decisions, and awards by international courts and tribunals are only binding on the parties to an adjudicated dispute. However, the reasoning or reasonings in such judgments, decisions, and awards are sources of international law and provide guidance on the legality or otherwise of actions or positions taken by states that were not party to that particular dispute. One of the first things I want to bring to your attention in terms of the case law, and that this comes from the case between Eritrea and Yemen of 1998 at paragraph 22, the ICJ said, although an agreement has not entered into force and thus cannot be said to bind the parties as a treaty, it is useful evidence of their thinking at that date. This other quote comes from the Cameroon versus Nigeria case of 2002, And this is very, very pertinent to the case between, or case that is developed between Guyana and Suriname, because in this case, Nigeria sought to put aside or set aside the fact that there were exchanges of notes verbals between the French and the English that established the frontier between Nigeria and Cameroon. The International Court of Justice specifically stated that whatever was incorporated in those exchange of notes has the status of an international agreement. So, what I'm trying to convey to you is the fact that because of the fact that the British and the Dutch had done like the French and the English in regard to Nigeria and Cameroon, had also exchanged notes, had also agreed before drafting that draft treaty. They had agreed where the boundary between Guyana and Suriname would be. So, in order to examine the case law, I think it is best to look at the case between Guyana and Suriname. There is a marker. If you look here, you will see there is a little engraving there that says 1936. That is because that's a marker that was set up at point 61, just off of 63 Beach, which is the point of origin of the maritime boundary between Guyana and Suriname. And that was agreed between the British and the Dutch. Now let us take it step by step. First, the British and the Dutch exchanged notes verbals as to where the boundary should be. They agreed on coordinates. One interesting story as to where marker B is the fact that when the commissioners left London and The Hague, they were told of a specific coordinate at which to place marker B. But when they got there, once they had used those coordinates, marker A would have ended up at C. So they adjusted those coordinates and adjusted also the direction of the maritime boundary line. That is to say, there was agreement, and then there was act in pursuit of that agreement. So it was not just a case whereby the two states simply said, we think the boundary should be here. They actually went on the ground and marked a spot from where the boundary should begin. During the case before the tribunal, Suriname took the position that whether the pillar and the marker were the true objects constructed in 1936, and if so, whether or not they were in the correct and original positions was both known and unknowable. Suriname therefore proposed that the tribunal simply treated the astronomical coordinates in the historical record as WGS coordinates as opposed to mathematically transforming those coordinates. So the logical thing would have been to do a mathematical transformation. I will go back to that point shortly. Because of the fact that we were convinced that what we had found at 61 is indeed marker and pillar B, we invited the tribunal to send their expert to Guyana. Suriname, of course, objected, but the tribunal insisted. And the hydrographer found that pillar A and pillar B were in exactly the positions where they were supposed to be in. If the proposal by the Surinamese had been accepted, it would have meant that the boundary marker B would have been some 1,348 feet off of its intended position. But that is not just the important thing. The more important thing is that it would have meant that the very foundation of the boundary agreements between the British and the Dutch would have been removed from its legal foundation. So, Guyana put up a vehement fight, and the tribunal agreed that those positions were exactly as they were, based on their own GPS readings and doing the transformation from astronomical to WGS coordinates. So, let's look at the decision of the tribunal. The tribunal said, that the 10-degree line is established between the parties from the starting point to the 3 nautical mile limit of the territorial sea. The tribunal was not being novel nor arbitrary. It was simply acting upon what is internationally recognized as international boundary law doctrine. It says, once agreed, the boundary stands. For any other approach would vitiate the fundamental principle of the stability of boundaries. And that doctrine has been repeated several times by the International Court of Justice. If you forget any other slide, I would like you to remember this slide because it has relevance for all of our boundaries. Further, the tribunal said, as the tribunal accepts the 10-degree line to the 3 nautical mile limit, it also accepts the 1936 point, that is the marker that I showed to you, as the reference point for the drawing of the maritime delimitation line. That is because, in international law, to recognize a frontier is essentially to accept that frontier, that is to draw legal consequences from its existence, to respect it, and to renounce the right to contest it in the future. Another aspect to examine to see whether or not indeed and in fact there is an agreement delimiting the boundaries, not just the maritime boundaries, but the land boundaries between Guyana and Suriname, is to look at Article 15. Article 15 says, failing agreement by them to the contrary, neither state may extend their territorial sea beyond the median line. These were the possibilities of the lines. The tribunal insisted that it had to be the 3 nautical miles on a 10-degree angle, which means the tribunal conformed that what was accepted between 1929 and 1936 were binding on both states. Again, the tribunal was not being inventive, because as you can see from the case of the passage of the right of passage over Indian territory, it says the court must attribute decisive effect to that practice for the purpose of determining their specific rights and obligations. Such a particular practice must prevail over any general rules. The UNCLOS rules would have been general, but because of the fact that the two states were parties to the convention, we had to observe what the convention says. And again, you can see there from the tribunal, it says, although the proposed treaty embodying the agreement was not signed, in large part because of the advent of the Second World War, the parties acted upon it for 30 years, and in their relations regarded 10-degree line as a proper delimitation line in the territorial sea. And thus my time is up. I just wanted to leave that with you to say, as far as we are concerned, while our borders are not barriers, they are meant for cooperation. We will not, of course, allow things that will result in a diminution of our territorial integrity to take place if it is that will be the result. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Madam Chair, Honorable Speaker, Honorable Ministers, Chief Justice, 10th Vice Chancellor, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It is really a great privilege to participate in this second convention on law and society, to celebrate the life and the extraordinary achievements of the outstanding jurist J.O.F. Haynes. We pay him due honor in considering the subject about Guyana's borders and their ramifications, which are unfolding this very evening. The cut and thrust of debate and disputation always appeal to Justice Haynes, and I'm confident that he would have been at home here this evening. Some general comments. Like other international borders, our borders reflect all the cited elements, boundaries, barriers, and bridges. History has also imposed other factors that incite aggressive interventions that seek to reshape the internationally recognized borders. Indeed, the predecessor colony had been in the possession of one or other European powers as fortunes in Europe ebbed and flowed and borders were adjusted and realigned. Today, or tonight, there's one who hankers over a glorious heritage and still dreams of territorial changes. We should never underestimate the intensity of this ambition, for in another region, the annexation of Crimea in 2014 is a vivid reminder of the ever-present danger. Borders are everywhere and have generated a multitude of studies. They are essentially administrative devices to mark one entity from another, and not necessarily territorial. The concept is as old and primitive as humankind and has been subject to devastating changes, deformation, and sometimes amusement. I'm thinking of Shoinka's description of the slicing of Africa into nation states. And to respond to the varying moods of mankind. Greed, ambition, hysteria, supremacy, and sometimes megalomania. At the source is the continuing clash between the strong and the weak, and the impulse for conquest, expansion, and dominion over neighbors or entities, weak or strong. This is what has made great empires and great nations, so we have been told, and this has produced tyrants. Thus, the delimiting and demarcation of borders have been influenced by historical, natural, geopolitical, and geoeconomic factors. These, in turn, have informed the primary responsibility about the defense of the sovereignty of states and the maintenance of their territorial integrity and national identity. Guyana's borders identify all of these characteristics, and the ramifications are considerable. When you take into account our small population of less than 1 million people in relation to our geographic size, our celebrated diversity with a recurring feature of coming together and coming apart almost simultaneously, one may reasonably dispute whether such a state was ever meant to exist. Nevertheless, it has, and has stimulated both appraisal and censure about its purpose and its achievements. Geography has been the leading determinant in the construction of a state's national interests, usually premised upon the security of the state, including the defense of its borders. To this end, territorial defense becomes the cardinal principle in the formulation and conduct of both foreign and defense policies. When you consider the huge disparities between us and two of our neighbors in land, in population, in resources, economic and defense, comparison is rather alarming, if there should be any comparison at all, particularly at the military and defense level. It's not so easy to make comparisons or calculations at the diplomatic level. And while both elements constitute defense, diplomacy generally precedes the military. As von Clausewitz so aptly recalled, war is the continuation of policies. So for Guyana, our defense relied first on the deployment of diplomatic initiatives. Guyana has 3 land borders of some 2,921 kilometers, a coastline of 459 kilometers, an expansive maritime space that includes the territorial sea, the continental shelf, and the exclusive economic zone. The huge territorial claims by two neighbors make certain that the enunciation of the national interest was neither academic nor implicit. It was graphic and was quite evident. So at the center is a reliance on the principles enshrined quite early in the Charter of the United Nations at Article 2, exhorting the peaceful settlement of disputes and refraining from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of states. The young state, upon attaining its political independence in May 1966, amidst the resurgence of a territorial claim long settled by international arbitration in 1899, and the coincidence of the announced Suriname claim to the new river triangle, was afforded no pause in the defense of its borders and territory. Its foreign policy, formulated around the principles of non-alignment, which meant not being a pawn of east or west, began building bridges with all our neighbors, including the claimants, constructing strategic alliances and consolidating historic ties with states and organizations that endorsed and respected these principles of the peaceful settlement of dispute. Notwithstanding a rather limited spread of diplomatic missions and personnel, the danger of disintegration and dismantling of the state has honed a foreign policy and diplomacy that were acknowledged and recognized in the international community. On 2 occasions, Guyana was chosen to represent Latin America and the Caribbean in the UN Security Council and served 1 term on the International Court of Justice in the person of Dr. Mohammed Shahabuddin, and also on the International Criminal Court. 3 terms as Commonwealth Secretary General, Dr. Shahabuddin, and was chosen among 22 states from 5 continents, 8 of whom were from industrialized north, to participate in the international meeting on cooperation and development in Cancun, Mexico, in October 1981. This was the only North-South summit ever convened. One may conclude in this conversation that this is a noteworthy instance of the border posing real threats to our national being, carried with it the germ and benefit of opportunity. All right, I get a signal. I'm sending back another signal. Borders have a longevity, and I need a little bit, and often a permanence. Allies friends, and even adversaries of one generation may change in the succeeding generation. There's always the dynamics of change. Thus, the solidarity of one era can be somewhat ambivalent in another, as we have seen in the reaction of some CARICOM states to the Venezuelan claims. No doubt this was occasioned by their own assessment of their respective national interests. In real politics, the guiding principle has been that in international relations, there are no permanent friends or enemies, only permanent interests, though neighbors may claim some permanence. So Guyana, wary of the territorial claims, is obliged to advance and to support as often as necessary the international principles about the rejection of the threat or use of force to settle disputes and the peaceful settlement of disputes. We cannot be seen to equivocate or to shelter under abstention when votes are called, or to be selective in demonstrated cases of the use of force in the acquisition of territory. There are no permanent friends, only permanent interests. So the features of the barriers are constant in the relations with Venezuela, and from time to time, they were outrageously fortified. In May 2015, coinciding with the announcement by ExxonMobil of the discoveries of world-class reserves of oil in Guyana's maritime space, President Maduro signed Decree number 1787, purporting to annex nearly all of Guyana's continental shelf and exclusive zone. This was a flagrant and brazen violation of international law, for Venezuela has no coastline upon which to project such a claim, and some of this annexation included the maritime space of neighboring CARICOM states. You'll note the discovery of the reserves of oil is fully integrated in this issue of the borders. Oil was always extant in Venezuelan ambition and assertions to Guyana's maritime space, as we have previously seen in the Leone Decree. And such valuable resources have frequently been the cause of border wars and disputes, and have advertised more prominently those aspects of the border and obstacles to sustaining bridges and cordiality. Now, in this matter of the exploiting of our maritime resources, I want you to just take a brief look at how well-intended initiatives have brought weaker and smaller states into conflict by extending their maritime borders and their potential wealth. For if resources are to be explored and exploited, there is a compelling duty of protection and defense. And so these new wealthy states are now pitted against the enormous resources, financial, technological, and other, of the powerful corporate giants, and sometimes their parent states. And there is the opening an opportunity and temptation for graft as we have never seen before. Now, I just run through Brazil. I'm seeing a zero. Brazil has borders with 10 South American states. And Brazil has worked on the principle that good fences make good neighbors. Brazil has settled all its border problems with all its states. Venezuela, on the other hand, has problems with all its neighbors except Brazil. My colleague has spoken relations with Brazil exemplify in almost every aspect the quality of bridges and cooperation and not barriers. Suriname, despite ups and downs, my colleagues have pointed to the New River Triangle, I would say the relationship is satisfying, is acceptable. But the maritime claims led to the crisis in 2000, and that is being worked on. Now, the new test of the maritime bit is being linked, I say, with all the border problems. And what we have, we want to know whether the new wealth, places us in the position of a partnership, what kind of partnership that exists between the rider and the horse. It's an unequal partnership, but it is not unworkable. I can say more than that, but I wouldn't. I'm being Now at this point, at this closing point, when there are enough problems with managing reacting to the wealth, the new wealth caused by the extension of our economic zone, we are fortunate in a way that the decision of the UN Secretary General 2 days ago to refer the territorial claim to the International Court. It's a good decision. It is what we wanted. It opens a definitive solution to the claims. It seeks to end 51 years of obstruction and delay. Notwithstanding, you may have heard, and this is breaking news, so this cannot be included in my time, that this is breaking news, please. Venezuela has strongly criticized, last night, I'm still writing, the Secretary General's decision to refer the matter to the ICJ. There is some uncertainty in what Venezuela, I said criticize. I didn't say reject. That is still working its way out. But she's criticized the decision on the basis that the Geneva Agreement makes adequate provision to resolve the issue. We've been working on that for 51 years, and you know how adequate that is. Now, this is an extraordinary moment for us. I will shape this period of transition. It calls among us for self-control, patience, and judgment. And I can add that success is not final, and failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. And we must take inspiration from those who have been exposed to this probing of their stamina and their endurance and have survived. The outstanding jurist J.O.F. Haynes, in whose honor this convention is fittingly convened, and I may add some of his contemporaries, Justices Kenneth George, Kenneth Stobie, Aubrey Fraser, Lionel Lloyd, and Evie Lockhus, two of whom served in the diplomatic service. We have the magnificence of their legacy, and let us strive to summon up and replicate their commitment, elan, dedication, integrity in the protection of our patrimony and defense of our country. I thank you very much and apologize for the extra 1 or 2 minutes I took.
Good evening, everyone. Vice Chancellor and Dr. Reynolds, thank you for inviting me. We have as you can see, a very hard taskmaster time-wise. So, Honorable Minister, Honorable Speaker, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, audience all, I'll proceed straight into my presentation, which really will focus on a bit of geography to share some thoughts with you on defense and development and on the topic of Guyana's borders are their boundaries, barriers, or bridges. Border is a line separating two countries and is synonymous with boundary and frontier, established through agreements or imposed or inherited, in our case inherited, from the British. And boundary is defined as a line where one country ends and another begins. Here we have Guyana's established international borders. The British Guyana Venezuela border, the Tri-Junction Point in Roraima, and the border with Brazil, Tri-Junction Point on the East Kutari, and of course the border with Suriname. Territorial and maritime claims, as we heard from our previous speakers, give rise to security concerns that restrict or limit movement, and harmonization of trade, economic, social, and cultural transboundary relationships. In that sense, they're barriers. The map on the left shows our established borders, and the map on the right shows the zone of reclamation that Venezuela claims, 70% of our territory, and the New River Triangle. So you see, if they both get their ways, we'll be left with a leg of pork. The internationally established boundary markers, just to give you a feel for the physical infrastructure, this is on the summit of Mount Roraima. Venezuelans, in fact, prize out the Guyana aspect of it, and every time we keep replacing it, they keep pricing it out. And this is a typical boundary marker on the Brazil-Guyana frontier. Again, a feel for the geography. You've heard about Ankoko Island, 7 square kilometers. It's at the junction of the Venemo River with the Cayuni. And in fact, when the arbitral award was made, the upper Cayuni is in Venezuela. So the frontier actually cuts across Ankoko Island. And our portion here, which as you see is a larger portion, this was occupied by the Venezuelans in 1966. And interestingly, this information came to us from a boat captain named Mr. Levens, MS, who plied the route from Bartica to Ettringbang, where there's some mining activities along the river, and he provided the services, and that trip took 1 month because of the number of portages that they had to do. So this is the area which has been occupied by Venezuela since 1966. And that's an aerial photograph which I took last year at Ringbang airstrip, at a police station. The military is somewhere which you don't need to know. And this is Ankoko Island with Venezuela and Guyana. I hope that gives you a feel for the geography. And then offshore, this is the area appropriated by Maduro in 2015. Is thinking that that is the coastline of Esquibo, and therefore projecting it takes most of the Stabroek block in which we have the ExxonMobil operation. So you see how significant this is, not only territorially, but in terms of our economy and our whole national psyche. Legal issues challenging the validity of the arbitral award of 1899. Validity issue, we're told, is referred to to the UN Secretary General, who made his decision. And of course, we've heard that Venezuela has, in a sense, decided that it was not the way it wanted to go. What I hope is that, however long this process takes at the ICJ, that there's some clear commitment Venezuela will neither compromise our security nor inhibit Guyana's development. Note that Venezuela has presidential elections by April, I'm told, and therefore it'll be interesting to see the internal dynamics in Venezuela as it relates to their courses of action. Settlement of the maritime boundary. Bear in mind that, unlike Suriname, Venezuela is not a signatory of the UN Conference on the Law of the Sea. And the implications for Suriname and those Caribbean states such as Trinidad and Tobago which have contiguous maritime boundaries with Venezuela. You recall when A&R Robinson went after the Muslimin coup, attempted coup, to Venezuela for treatment. They did a deal, and we heard about it after. And they had in fact cut into our maritime boundary. Social ramifications. I don't know the exact number of Guyanese now living in Delta Amakura, but I do know that in 1993, when I visited there as part of the presidential delegation at that time, there were 50,000 Guyanese. And they are now third generation living in that area, Port Ordaz, San Felix, etc. Emigration and traditional cross-border movement. This was spoken about as recently this week by our foreign minister and the president, referring to the number of migrants from social stress in Venezuela coming into Mabaruma, Port Caichuma, across the frontier into places like Caican, and even going into the Rupununi, particularly those who have relatives working in the mines in Venezuela. Security of investments, jobs and social services. You do recall that historically we had the Beale Aerospace project, which was vetoed by Venezuela. And then, of course, the Anandarko, seizure of the Anandarko ship, which was doing surveys in the area on our western frontier, maritime sector. And more recently, of course, 2015, the appropriation by Maduro of a significant portion of our maritime space. Spurious claim by Suriname. The ambassador touched on this, but again, a feel for the geography. The frontier, this is the New River, and that is the Quarantine River, and this is the area claimed by Suriname, which you can see on their maps shaded. These are maps which were produced by Holland. Loth, in fact, was a land surveyor, and he produced these maps in 1888, which shows the Quarantine River as the frontier. It was, and this is the tri-junction point here, Ambassador George showed that. This here is our photographs, which were taken by Captain Arthur Hudson, who was a Royal Engineer of the British Commission that worked with the Brazilian and Dutch Commission establishing the tri-junction point on Farragul's Rock. I took this photograph last June, going with some people from the National Parks Commission, etc. And this is the only open space in the forest. So the Kutari, the source of these Kutari is in fact flows across these rocks and into the Quarantine. You have two branches, the West Kutari and the East Kutari. And these photographs here show the tri-junction point being established on Farragul's Rock. The legal implications, acknowledging the validity of the tri-junction point on East Kutari as identified by Schomburg and accepted by British, Dutch, and Brazil at the 1899 Arbitration Tribunal. Rejecting Barrington Brown's suggestion, that's the basis of the claim by Suriname, that an English geologist, Barrington Brown, went up the New River and felt that it was larger than a Quarantine. This was in fact debunked in a sworn declaration by Professor Farabi, an anthropologist of the University of Philadelphia, after a survey of both the New River and the Kutari in 1913. And upholding the principle that it is the river with the largest basin that is the main affluent or the main tributary, supported by Dr. Iseman, a leading Dutch authority, the Netherlands Minister of the Colonies in his address to the Dutch Parliament, and by scientific measurements of the comparative flow of both rivers taken by the Wilhelmina expedition of 1926. These are documents which will be vital when we come around to discussing the ownership of that triangle. We know we own it, but to convince the Surinamese that they have no claim. And of course, Brazil's commitment to the integrity of its existing borders with neighboring states. In fact, the border with Brazil was also the subject of an arbitration tribunal in which the King of Italy was involved. Summary of the social and environmental ramifications. impacts negatively on our national development strategy and socio-economic development, restricts bilateral cooperation and good neighborliness, facilitates international piracy offshore. You know the problems we've had with our fishermen and others who are plying our coastline. Ecocide, cutting down of trees, illegal mining, and unregulated trade in endangered species. Porous and unregulated borders allow for default situation in criminal activities, the transmission of diseases, biopiracy, and the theft of intellectual property, and imposes sustained psychological stress on the national psyche. What about our borders as bridges? Working together and integrating action towards increasing legal trade and travel, strengthening human security, enhancing and expanding economic development in the region and extant. Well, we have international commitments, and we intend to honor those as it relates to planetary security, our natural, which is all the resources we have, and our human capital. Climate security, very topical. Sustainable development goals, the importance of the Guyana Shield, which I'll come to, and the Amazon biome, Guyana's geostrategic position in relation to South America and Central America and the Caribbean, integrated regional infrastructure, collaboration on research, science and technology, collaboration on trade, socio-economic opportunities, disaster mitigation and response, socio-cultural exchanges. And here you have Guyana, English-speaking country in South America. It's in terms of our geostrategic position, and also as it relates to the Caribbean, Central America, and extant. Here we have, the relationship we've had historically with Europe, North America, the Caribbean, but also looking towards expanding our relationship at the regional level. Regional cooperation and the management of our natural capital, the Amazon biome and the Guyana Shield. You've heard a lot of this. The President has been speaking about the importance of the Guyana Shield, 2 to 4 billion years old, high degree of endemism, unique species, 20% of the fresh water of the world, and so on. And here you have the boundaries of the Guyana Shield. It encompasses parts of Colombia, Venezuela, Brazil, and of course takes into Guyana, Suriname, and French Guyana. And this here is a study done about 20 years ago by a group of 50 scientists working for 1 week in Suriname and updating this information. The darker areas and the lighter areas reflect areas of high biodiversity and ecosystem importance. So when you are actually looking at development of this region, you have to take into account the impact on these very important areas. Our own internal regional, meaning the 10 regions of Guyana, and the linkages we have. On the right, you see here all these light areas are Amerindian title land. The darker areas are where we have our protected areas, the Kanaku Mountains. Now the YY area is a protected area. The Iwakrama Reserve, Kaichor National Park, and Shell Beach. Collaboration on climate impacts and disaster responses. These are all building bridges, taking into account all the things that are current and futuristic. Here is an example of what occurred last year when we were hit by a series of hurricanes originating off the coast of West Africa. And here you have a more vivid, this year of course, late last year and early this year, the rapid decline in temperatures in North America. And then our own experiences within the Caribbean of 3 hurricanes concurrently within the Caribbean, Jose, Irma, and Katia. Building bridges in the context of regional integrated infrastructure. I just highlighted 2 here, one by President Lula at the opening of the Takatu Bridge over the Takatu River. There can be no political, cultural, or economic integration without physical integration. It's in Brazil's interest. It's in the interest of Guyana. Brazil needs this. Guyana needs this. That is why we have to inaugurate the bridge. And the Prime Minister Hines, at the time, we have to develop our kinship among our peoples who, though geographically close, are being kept apart by the forces of our history, language, and culture. Now, you probably heard of IRSA, Initiative for the Integration of Regional Infrastructure in South America. And this gives you an idea of what has been achieved to date in terms of connectivity, and this is what is desired in terms of the eastern side of the continent. This road we've spoken about for decades. We hope it becomes, it's realized, the road to Brazil, because it connects you with a highway which takes you here. And similarly, the bridging of the Currentine River, the border between Suriname and Guyana, and the bridge already built here will open up new vistas while we continue our trade with Caribbean and the North. Then we have opportunities which we're capable of exploiting. The bridge over the Takatu, Roraima State in Brazil, and this is the Takatu Bridge, and that's Lethem and Bonfim. This is the bridge over the Oyapock River, connecting Amapá State with French Guyana. And once these bridges here are in place, then obviously they become bridges for collaboration and economic development, technology transfer, and lessons learned. Opportunity for collaboration on technology and environmentally appropriate extraction and processing of mineral and oil and gas. You do know that the continents at one time were joined, the Pangaea, and this is the Guyana Shield, the West African Shield, as they're separated. It's very interesting to note that many of the companies that are currently operating in Guyana, Guyana Gold, etc., have similar properties in West Africa. For whatever reason, we have not been dealing with West Africa. I mean, historically, the slaves came from West Africa. And I think it's about time we start developing those links with Africa. Bridges for exchange of knowledge and technology. I just put this here for interest. About 2,000 years ago, the ancestors of our Lokono people, the Arawaks, found that it was appropriate to do agriculture in the floodplain by building mounds. These mounds were discovered by chance in 1982 when I was flying over, going to Tacoma, and realized that, these were not natural features, they were anthropogenic. And I reported this to Professor Dennis Williams. When they went in 10 years later, this here has opened up a whole new vista of occupation and settled agriculture for nearly 5,000 years. And these were the fish ponds on the banks of the Ichuni River. As the river flowed, the fish were trapped, and as the river receded, they went there and harvested throughout the year. New knowledge are things that we know. Vice Chancellor, new knowledge coined by a Maori professor, things that we already know, the institutional memory, and how we can improve that with new technology on the right. Collaboration to mitigate transboundary environmental impacts. I mentioned earlier the mines. Look at the border with Guyana, and the Venezuelan mining activity is taking place within 20 to 25 miles from that frontier. The sindicatos that you read about recently are operating in this area. And this is the extent of ecocide, destruction of trees, and leaching this effluent into the Cayuni River, coming all the way down to Bartica. Building lines of communication, I mentioned the IRSA and the project, and the need for us to develop our own internal roads and mechanisms to do a number of things. One, to deal with the impact of climate change on the coast, opening up lines of communication to the hinterland, and eventually connecting with the highways leading both east and west for extensive trade and integration in the regional system in South America. This goes in the Region 9, Region 8 and Region 9, and that's the road the highway leading up into Caracas. In conclusion, internationally and regionally acknowledged borders remove barriers and facilitate rather than inhibit regional cooperation. Cross-border cooperation facilitates building of bridges of cooperation between and among neighboring states. Bridges of cooperation strengthen human security, conserve natural capital, enhances and expands economic development. And the integration of action, the collective action, drives economic growth and development. For those who are interested, that's a bibliography, and you'll note here a very important document done by Ambassador Cedric Joseph on Anglo-American diplomacy. I recommend you reading, as well as a number of other publications here, which will be of importance, especially to the young people who are doing and learning and building up their knowledge about the issues relating to the border. Thank you very much.
Keep it on. Did you have to put that up more than once?
Thank you very much. The fact that you're a Major General, and I noticed the strategy. Good evening to each and every one of you. All protocols have been observed, but I just want to acknowledge that we do have the Minister here and the Speaker of the House, Minister Ramjatan, and the Speaker of the House present. But I really want to use this opportunity to commend our panelists for the kind of discourse that they have set the stage with. I particularly also want to use this opportunity to say to Vice Chancellor Griffith that this has been indeed a worthwhile investment of the university's energy and time, and to congratulate Dr. Reynolds and team for the work they are doing. For those of you who have been following the university as we move forward, you would recognize for us how important it is that the University of Guyana become engaged and really meaningfully engaged at this time in this discussion. Now, how are we going to do this? We've heard several things from Ambassador George. We've heard him talk a lot about, and he focused specifically on the Suriname issue, which is of importance to us. We've heard also Ambassador Joseph and gentlemen, Major General General Singh. I just want to say to you that I have had to be a timekeeper. I've done it before. So I've become a little bit of an expert at this, even though you guys have strategically managed to outmaneuver me at times. But I really want to applaud you for how you have been able to share the information in a meaningful way with us. Now, what we do have in this room, and I wish for all of us to recognize, is a set of experts. A lot of us, because this story has been going on for 51 years and more, right? And all of us know a little bit. And as Vice Chancellor started off by saying, we sometimes don't know how much we know. And then we also have our children that need to know more. So it's for us to clarify the information. So what I would encourage us as we further this conversation is that those of you who want to make a comment, please make a short, sharp comment, because I'll be monitoring you. It's important that we have this conversation. I want you to go home and tell everybody in your home what we talked about. We need to know why it's important that we have a successful outcome in our border issue. We need to understand why it's important, that they know why this is important to us. It's a conversation each and every one of us will have to know about. I noticed the CEO for the Lands and Commission here, and he has a right and a responsibility to be here, just like all of us. because we have to maintain and to do everything in our power to make sure that we address this issue thoroughly and stand in solidarity and support with our government. This is not politics. This is about Guyana. Now, so I'm going to start the conversations. Please indicate, state your name, be brief. You can either ask a question, make a comment, add to the discourse, but make it short and snappy so that we can get much out of this. The floor is now open. I noticed 1, 2 hands. So I'll take the gentleman here. We have a roving mic. And Dr. Aaron on the other side.
Thank you and good evening. I recognize my former colleague, Ambassador Keith, my junior in the ministry, and of course my senior colleague, Dr. Scotland. Barton, if I run off the track, you'll stop me, please. Just a couple of things. Listening to Ambassador George's presentation, he made it clear that there are a lot of unanswered questions about the Suriname border, and I have always argued that the Venezuela issue was the much more dealable, much more treatable, much more justiciable. The law is on our side, the history is on our side, the state practice is on our side. There was an agreement, there was a decision from the tribunal, but then a couple of things changed. Nicolas Maduro became president, Guyana found oil, President Maduro issued a decree which is different from anything we had ever seen before. If you look at the Leone Decree of 69, they only wanted 3 miles. This gentleman wants, 200, I can't remember, almost 300 miles, encroaching on other countries, other third states. Some other things happened. President Granger and President Maduro went to the UN, and Secretary General Ban issued a statement, a very peculiarly worded statement. At the very end of the statement, he spoke something about a mutually beneficial solution. And with the greatest of respect to our diplomatic corps, that statement should not have seen the light of day. As a simple principle, why should somebody benefit from a wrong? But, the Secretary General is performing a role. But if you look back at that statement, it says at the end, is a reference to a mutually beneficial statement. You fast forward to a few days ago, and I must commend the Vice Chancellor for his prescience in setting this forum 2 days after the announcement. The Secretary General has chosen the ICJ. And lo and behold, President Maduro issued a statement. For the young students here in particular, you can Google these things now. If you go home tonight, look at Article 36.1 and Article 36.2 of the Statute of the International Court of Justice. It's a consent regime. You can't take Venezuela kicking and screaming to the court. It's a consent regime. I've said that publicly, I've said that officially. And nothing in the Geneva Agreement specifically specifies the ICJ. So even though the case, as I said, was always the easier one, there's some new elements which we have a former level team of lawyers, I gather, have to put their head down and look at it. So there's some new issues arising there. But I think at the end of the day, that case ought to produce the result that we want. With the Suriname issue now, again, I always thought, well, one has been settled, the offshore area, to the benefit of both sides. The river, for me, has always been straightforward. Brigadier General, some years ago, I made a presentation when the late Godwin McPherson was Chief of Staff. And I explained to your colleagues that the sovereignty over the water belongs to Suriname. And some members of the military had a problem with that. There's nothing, quote-unquote, wrong with that. But it's the New River Triangle where we'll have an issue. Ambassador George highlighted a lot of issues there. And again, we need to argue that case, but I think it's winnable. My one regret is that none of the distinguished gentlemen mentioned the other border, which is the one this way, the Atlantic. And, you can take Venezuela to the court. You can have a tribunal looking at the Suriname issue. Who you gonna take to deal with the sea level rise? That one is real. It's live. We've seen Paris, we've seen Marrakesh, we've seen Bonn. That issue is alive. And in looking at the holistic area of the borders, or what is the border or boundary, I think we need to put some attention to that one. The Venezuela issue is winnable, notwithstanding the new areas. and the challenges about Article 36 in the statute and how to get Venezuela to the court. That's a new dimension. Similarly, the Suriname issue is winnable, but for me, there's an unknown quantity there, an unknown element, which is the environmental border, the environmental challenge from sea level rise. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Just before the next speaker goes, I just want to remind us that we've already heard the three presenters, and they all had their 15 to 20 minutes. So please, in your comments, make it just brief, even though I know that you have important points to make. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ronald Aaron, University of Guyana. And this question, my question is directed to Major General Singh. When we speak in public and we say things like Venezuela has appropriated an area of sea, Major General, please correct me if I have misrepresented you, but I thought I heard you say appropriated. Sorry, could I finish, please, first? And so when we speak generally in public for our younger people and our older folks, are we conveying the wrong impression there when we use words like that? Instead of saying Venezuela is attempting to or attempted to, something of the sort? Thank you.
So we'll have another question, and after 3 questions, then we have the panelists respond. So could I have one more?
Good evening, Nicole Cole. My question is directed to Major General Retired Joseph. We have the Sindicato gang operating on our borders. What formula would you prefer to actually arrest the scourge of what they're actually doing? Because the video that I saw is wholly nauseating to watch someone's ears be cut off and then their heads be severed. Something must be done to arrest the Sindicato gang. What formula would you prefer? I thank you.
Thank you very much to the persons who asked questions. I'm now going to turn it over to the panelists in any order.
In relation to the appropriation, I take your point. In fact, President Maduro, by decree, and tasked the Venezuelan military, but Venezuelan Navy with enforcing it. So, of course, that is from their perspective. From our perspective, it belongs to us. We will not countenance any attempt by Venezuela to encroach within that territorial, that maritime space. In the case of the sindicatos, I believe that the video to which you're referring is the one which made the social media networks. I'm not sure whether that video has been authenticated, meaning, because things have been staged. I'm not saying by any means that this has been staged, because relatives have come forward and indicated this person is a known person who is missing. I don't believe that the Venezuelans are paying as much attention to what is happening on the eastern side. They're more concerned about what is happening in Caracas and the urban centers, because those are where the scent is more obvious. So the law enforcement on that eastern Venezuelan frontier, bordering our western frontier, is very weak. All we can do is to ensure that our eyes and ears, meaning our policemen and our soldiers in their deployment on that frontier, along with the support of persons who cross over and go to the frontier. We have people, in fact, who are working in the Venezuelan mines. Two showers have told me in the Rupununi that they've seen an increase in the number of people in their villages, because many of them who are undergoing stress in Venezuela are now coming back home. So all of that, what I intend to say is that the people who are crossing the frontier, whether to look for work or to visit relatives, are a source of information. And they can identify where the entry points are and exit points. those are areas that we need to keep under constant scrutiny. But as to what is happening in the mining area, we have little control over that, except to ensure that these reports are in fact acted upon, meaning they're publicized, whatever sanctions are necessary, human rights violations, etc., etc. But there's very little else we can do except to warn our people that fly the frontier, that go across there, that in search of work or trade, to be very conscious that their security is at risk.
Thank you.
Just a small comment to the question about... Question about appropriating Martin King. I have problems with time.
You know.
I have problems with calling in that corner is correct. But since I read what I wrote, I just wanted to leave the general impression that I stated that President Maduro issued Decree 17, etc., on May 7, purporting to annex most of Guyana's maritime sea. I think that is the issue you were raising, and you're correct to pick it up. But that is what we meant. 1968, the Leone Decree. Now, your point is very valid here. In 1968, President Leone issued a decree cordoning off the waters around our territorial sea. But we still swim and move around the waters, you see. So we can't say he annexed it, he made a big noise, you see. And the problem is in Venezuela, who may believe that they have all of this maritime. Now, an earlier question raised there. The maritime border will be a major issue in our relations with Venezuela. The current issue is executive. The current issue is executive. President Maduro's decree delimited Venezuelan territory commencing from the mouth of the Essequibo. Commencing from the mouth of the Essequibo, not Point Player. You see? So that is obviously a dream. Now, the situation is this. We are insisting that the validity of the arbitral award in 1899 is acknowledged by Venezuela before we proceed on any matter regarding the Venezuelan ambition over a part in the Atlantic Ocean. You spoke quite accurately. We have a problem. Venezuela and Trinidad have been carving out lines, and I think Venezuela and Trinidad cannot carve out maritime delimiting lines there without the participation of Guyana and possibly Barbados. The maritime lines are running in all kinds of the 200 EE exclusive economic zone, clashing all over the place. So, and the United Nations Convention laws, the states have to come together and agree to those lines, or refer the issue, as we did with Suriname, to arbitration. So the maritime issue is far from being settled. I don't want to say a bit more because the claims, am I on air? The recent claims of maritime claims of Venezuela are very strong, are very outrageous, and I'm speaking recent, I mean as of the end of last year. This is paper stuff. This isn't even purporting. This is as of the end of last year. But we'll hear more of that, I think, as the months go on. Thank you very much.
Ambassador George, would you want to make any comment?
Just a quick response to my friend Aaron from the University of Guyana. I agree with you. We have to be very, very careful how we use terms. What President Maduro did was an attempt at delineation. Two states delimit. When you delineate, you do something unilaterally. So if we speak publicly, we must make sure we understand those terms. The same goes for the Quarantine River. The draft treaty and what the parties agreed to between 1929 and 1936 spoke about Surinamese jurisdiction, not sovereignty. I thought I tried to explain that earlier. Because sovereignty means you have total control. Jurisdiction means, yes, some of your laws apply, but you cannot restrict the other riparian states, in all forms of usage. Thank you.
Okay. And just to reiterate what Ambassador Joseph says, something that we need to keep in mind, Venezuela's claims are outrageous. I use that, my privilege as a chair, to make that statement. So I now invite the next round of 3. Sir? So we have, if I may, we have 1, then 2. And I'm looking for a third hand. We have another 3 and 4. So we'll take 4 in this round before we continue.
Thank you. Clement Henry, Ministry of Public Security. In carefully listening to the presentation by the panelists, in terms of building bridges, I get the feeling that the presentation was quite realist in perspective, in that the suggestions were primarily forming strategic alliances with states. I want to add to the question, if there is room for a more internationalist approach, focusing with multinationals and other parties that will help our cause in terms of being able to preserve our territory from either Suriname or Venezuela. Is there a room for a more internationalist approach, working in conjunction and inviting multinationals to invest in these disputed zones so that we can have a more robust economic participation in this area that will help us in terms of being able to preserve those territories?
Let's have Ms. Janke, and then we come to Mr. Bess, Colonel Bess. And then there is another youngster here, and I think there was one other at the back.
Good evening. My name is Melinda Janke. I'm an attorney at law, and my other hat is an international lawyer. Can I just start by congratulating the University of Guyana for a fantastic evening, and also really heartfelt congratulations to the panel for superb presentations. I have 2 questions. One, first, I was happy to see that Major General Joseph Singh put up Venezuela's spurious claim, because that is in fact what it is. And particularly for the younger folks here, I would remind you that the 1899 arbitration is binding. The Geneva Agreement doesn't change that. And it is for Venezuela to come to us and to be able to say, well, we've got this thing called a letter or a memorandum from a junior counsel called Mali Provost, who waited until he was dead and everybody else was dead, and then they published it, in which he said he was really upset with the decision because he thought it was a done deal between the British and the Russians. How on earth is that going to affect a binding arbitration? So that would be my first question to the panel. The second was when we talked about bridges, and I want to just make maybe too bold a statement here. We don't have a quarrel with the Venezuelan people. There is a Venezuelan head of state that has made outrageous claims. And if the Venezuelan people right now are suffering, we are a rich country. Can we not send something over to help them? We have so much food. Could we not help the people in Venezuela? And that would be my second question. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. I have a lot of notes here, so I'm showing you up front.
Yes, but
Thank you very
be
much.
brief.
Yes, I'm Gary Best, an attorney at law and past chief of staff. I want to thank the panel think the panel did an excellent job. Just a few points I want to raise. I too want to start by saying the Venezuelan claim is not only spurious, but it's without any legal basis. I want to say, however, that when we look at the Guyana Suriname Award, Martin Bongji Award, and where we started from, that point 6-1. I mean, physically, when you look at it, it is in Guyana. I have a difficulty really with where we started, and there have been a lot of arguments of why we should have started there. As a compromise to holding the New River as Guyana territory, a compromise between the British and the Dutch. So where it left us, it was all the waters west of that maritime boundary line belong to Venezuela. So technically, at high water, 6-2, you're in Suriname. At high water, 6-3, you're in Suriname. If you're swimming, you're still in Suriname from that point to 6-1. So I don't personally like the award. It's binding. And I say that in this context, when we come to Venezuela and using Neville's point about the language of the Secretary General, we have to ensure there's no compromise in relation to our argument with Venezuela. That there's no mutual benefit to Venezuela, absolutely none. Because when you look at what happened between Guyana and Suriname, the entire Corentyne River belongs to Suriname. Waterways that are on the banks of Guyana up to 6-1 village belong to Suriname. And it is still unsettled what happens with the Kutari River, which is the source of the Corentyne River. What about those waterways? Do all of that belong to Suriname? So I don't think that is even settled. I think at some point in time, brilliant Guyanese will raise this matter, 10, 15, 20 years from now. They probably want to revisit that award. So I say that in relation to when we deal with Venezuela, that our negotiating team, there's no compromise whatsoever. My second point is that capabilities impact borders. And I think it's been asked here about Sindicato. We have to ensure we have the capability to deal with our borders. And my third point is there are natural consequences of borders. And some have been mentioned, and Melinda just raised one. We will have issues of either migrants or refugees related to our borders. How do we deal with the Venezuelan population? Do we see them as immigrants? Do we see them as migrants? Do we see them as refugees? I don't think we can sit back and do nothing about it because it becomes important for us as a nation state. And finally, Article 37 speaks about external relations to Guyana. And there are 2 points I want to raise there. Peaceful settlement of disputes. We have no border disputes. Those disputes are external. And secondly, sovereign equality. Guyana is a sovereign nation and we're equal to any other nation. So for those who want to look at external relations, it's already enshrined in our Constitution under Article 37. I have many more, but I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. There's a young man here.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jensen Samru. I'm a member of the Bishop's High School Law Society. My question is directed to Ambassador Cedric. You spoke, Ambassador, about the Geneva Agreement. Now, I have 3 questions for you. One, should the Geneva Agreement, should it have been signed in the first place? Secondly, do you believe that all the mechanisms under the Geneva Agreement has been exhausted? And thirdly, would Guyana be in breach of the Geneva Agreement should it decide to explore other options outside of said agreement? Thank you.
Thank you. I think so those are 4, but there was one last person, that hand that I saw.
Good evening, and thank you very much for those presentations. When Neville spoke about the statute on the ICJ, I was doing some research today and found that Article 94.1 of the UN Charter contemplates a kind of obligation on compliance, theoretically perhaps, on states when decisions of the ICJ are made. I wonder if I'm a bit confused when he suggests that not being a state party, there will be no compliance. Could anyone kind of help me to get over the unknown? Thanks.
Good. So we're going to have the panelists respond in any order.
If I may, I just would like to respond perhaps first to the question asked by Admiral Best.
The first thing is we know territory changes with the ebb and flow of the tide. The low water mark on the coast represents the starting point of the territorial sea. So if you're on the beach and you're in the water and you are where the low water mark would have been at high tide, you're not in Surinamese territory. And that goes from point 61 all the way westward. The other thing that you asked about, the fact that we have made a compromise in terms of using point 61 in exchange for a New River Triangle. The historical record, that, as I know it, does not bear that out in terms of point 61. Point 61 was established simply because there had to be a starting point from which to reference the maritime boundary. The British, of course, did not want to take responsibility for the buoying of the Corentyne River once she had already handed over jurisdiction to the Surinamese or to the Dutch. That is why they had to come up with a point that was away from the entrance of the Corentyne River, but also left the mouth of the river from which you have to enter and exit in Dutch hands. So from that perspective, what it meant is that once the British had agreed that that is the starting point of the boundary, Guyana, 76 years after, could not have tried to change that boundary because, as I said, once accepted, you have to, once agreed, you must accept the boundary as full, perfect, and final. I'm sure we don't want to turn ourselves like Venezuela. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's go.
Not addressing in any particular order, but the point you made about investments in the territory claimed by Venezuela and Suriname, I agree entirely that the more international interest you have in those areas. One can argue that we do have Guyana gold fields, the Australian mining company at Kaburi, ETK Sand Spring at Toroparu, to name a few. But that is not a substitute for we ourselves occupying. I remember very vividly that when I was asked by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to take the UN's team to have a visual of the area, they were led to believe that this area was uninhabited. And when they saw Mabruma, Matthews Ridge, the gold fields at Aurora, etc., it was a whole new awakening in terms of their understanding. And bear in mind, of course, that the Brazil border, the tri-junction point in Roraima, Venezuela will have to contend with the Brazilian policy that its borders are currently non-negotiable. So if you have a tri-junction point and Brazil is on Roraima, then it implies that Region 8, going all the way to Region 9, in a sense, Brazil is a key determinant in that. But I agree with your, occupation and building lines of communication, etc. Belinda, your point, well, she's not there. Oh, yeah. I don't know if you asked a rhetorical question in terms of Malay Privo. Okay.
Any further comments from the panel?
Yes. Thank you. Just to continue on the question and the answer of investments in the area, it is not for the want of trying and speaking in investments over 20, 30 years. Real industries, the one. Hiram, water.
Ambassador Joseph, excuse me, sorry. Could you just lift the mic a little closer?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. I said it's not for the want of trying about encouraging or developing a relationship with companies for investments in any part of Guyana, and particularly in the maritime space. Venezuela has found a way, it was part of the Venezuelan strategy, part of the Venezuelan policy to obstruct that investment. A major event, 1978, responding to those who are old enough to remember the Upper Mazaruni Project. There is an official objection by Venezuela to the World Bank for the government's undertaking of that project. And there is still in print and being distributed a beautiful letter from H.D. Hoyt as Minister of Development before he became president, reacting to the Venezuelan presentation. In the end, the World Bank didn't come on our side. They withdrew from the project, even though they had agreed that the project was a very feasible one. So it is not for the want of trying. What you see has happened now with ExxonMobil, it has got away from 1999. It has started real exploration about 10 years ago. And what has really happened, and in all the criticisms of the relations, and some of the criticisms are very valid, they have not taken notice that the exploration and the discovery of oil, massive resources in the Stabroek, in the Guyana Maritime Zone, the exploration and the country has led, is the first major breach in Venezuela's efforts to block investment. And the whole big development there, it's a major undertaking and it's a major impact. You're speaking about bridges, that has been. So you probably are aware of the number of companies that are lining up, there's oil, there's money there and so on, are lining up the funding. So 50 years of obstruction, successful are ending, not ended, ending. Yeah? Now, most of the discoveries, you can help me here, are in the eastern, eastern part of Guyana. Okay? Eastern part of the maritime space. But it is understood long ago by the Americans that we haven't found anything yet. The real reserves are in the west. Closer to Venezuela. And that accounts for Venezuelan activity, accounts for the purporting to annex the continental shelf. So I hinted earlier that the maritime thing is now open. You're correct to say, yes, we need these people there. I'm saying yes, we did. I'm going to give you an example, and I knew Hoyt was very upset about it. We had a company called Karen Walker. These are small companies who come and look around and probe around. They don't have the capacity, technological or financial, to complete the task. But they identify something. Shell, all outside Suriname, it's been going on since the 1970s. They identify something and they sell that project, that scheme to a bigger company. Karen Walker did identify something in that same eastern area, closer to the Orinoco. And suddenly, they left. Karen Walker exports or trades in whiskey in Venezuela. Venezuelans call him and says, your whiskey is in trouble if you continue there. I'm simplifying it, but this is true. Karen Walker walks away. I'm telling that story because I've heard a story umpteen times from Mr. Hoyt. Umpteen times. He tells it much better than me, much better than me. So that is my response to our response. There are specific questions for me. Geneva Agreement. Should it have been signed? That's an old issue. My simple answer is yes. Is yes. Geneva Agreement became part of our domestic differences and different reactions. My answer is yes. I've done some work in it. stimulated by the very question you asked. I took my retirement years, privately, quietly, to go after that issue. So you are correct to ask. And I said, the answer is yes. It's a long story. I can ask you, what would have happened in 1966 without a Geneva Agreement? But I'm not going to ask you that. Brigadier Chief of Staff has spoken with Ankoko. Just think of Ankoko, think of Lethem, think of Jaguar, the incident, all those things took place. Camp Jaguar, 4 years after independence, despite the 3 years. The pressure was fantastic. These chaps knew it much better than us. The Geneva Agreement was absolutely necessary. It provided, I'm borrowing a term, a path to a settlement. It provided a path to a settlement, to an agreed settlement between a new, young, weak state against the powerful Venezuela. I can tell you more, but let's keep it for another time. You asked whether all the provisions in the agreement have been exhausted. Not a good question. I say yes. Not I. The government of Guyana says yes. 51 years. We talked 51 years. We've gone through an uncertain time, a good officer's period for about 15, an enhanced mediation period. Venezuela likes it. This morning I was reading the statement. Venezuela wants us to remain in the Geneva Agreement. Remain there. Why? Remain and talk. What is the reason for going to the ICJ? The reason for going to the ICJ, and I'm not too clear on an earlier observation by Mr. December, but I'm not a lawyer, that the Geneva Agreement doesn't say anything about the ICJ. I'm not too clear on that. The reason for going to the ICJ is that there the hope for a definitive, a final settlement, one way or the other. We know our way. We sure that. We don't want another 51 years of the Geneva settlement. There are no other facilities in the Geneva settlement. And those facilities, those means of settlement in Geneva really come from Article 33 of the United Nations Charter. And the last means in Article 33 and in the Geneva is judicial settlement. And when you speak of judicial settlement in the United Nations framework, you speak of the body established within the United Nations framework to facilitate a judicial settlement. That is the ICJ. Again, I'm not a lawyer. One other point, and I think Mr. Curtin was correct to make that observation, that about state compliance on the ICJ and the statutes. Again, I'm not a lawyer and I don't know the statutes, all the statutes. You probably know one or two, just enough to get around. But what I know is fact. Because I was looking at it this morning, I told you it was breaking news. I was looking at it this morning when I read the statement from Caracas that said that there's a peculiar statement strongly criticized the Secretary General's decision to refer the matter to the case. They never said they rejected. Still, they can say that. They're still with it. Now, compliance, no. And I knew only recently, 2 years ago, Philippines brought the case of the South Sea China against the powerful People's Republic of China, who did not participate. And the court went ahead, examined all the documents, and issued a substantial judgment in support of the rights of Philippines, which will also apply to Malaysia, Vietnam, and Korea. China did not participate. There's no compliance. But China is not unsmart. Didn't participate. What China did was to put its case, the new technology people know, and what they call a white paper. I think they copied that from the British. The British are masters of white paper and blue paper. You never know what the color is. China made this case. China is not participating with the white paper and floated it, what they call it, up in the clouds. You all know the thing. Yeah. It left this case in the air. But it's not going to the Hague to the field. So I don't know the compliance, because if you're saying that if Venezuela says they're not going to the court, I think taking into account whatever case we put up the history of the Geneva Agreement, we will have to, once jurisdiction is acknowledged, we will have to make the first move to the court and see if Venezuela will stay out. A bit on Malaprefo and all those things. Yes, the memorandum. And this is what Guyana has been saying, not all the time, but we try negotiation. You have an issue with the arbitral award. More than an issue. You say it's a farce, it's a fraud, and so on. You have an issue, you contend it is null and void. That's not a political issue, that's a legal issue. You have to advance legal arguments to establish your case of nullity. And there's only one body that can deal with that, that is organized and established after 20 years of war and fighting, and that's the ICJ. So all these Venezuela saying, it's only the ICJ. This morning, Venezuela is making its case on the Geneva Agreement. And I know, over the years, there are 8 articles in the Geneva Agreement. The last 2 are translation and so on. Of the 5 significant articles, Venezuela has deformed, has rejected, has abused all of these major articles. And yet this morning or yesterday, they can pretend to project the Geneva Agreement as the means of settlement. We've been doing it for 51 years. All the school children will do it. So that is my answer. You asked a third question, which I didn't hear too well. I answered 2 of your 3 questions, so I got into the majority there. I don't know the third question. But it's states compliance. Let us check on the Philippines-China case, which was settled in 2016. And I don't have any time to here, no?
Yes, you do.
My memory is now, you're working, my memory is now coming back. It's now coming back to old things about power and strength in the ICJ. Sometime in the 1980s, when Nicaragua had the Marxist administration, the United States had mined the harbor of Nicaragua under the administration of
Ortega.
Mined it. They took them to the court and got a decision against the United States. I don't think the United States participated in it. Got a decision. The United States says, we're not going to respect that decision. The United States is big and bad, eh? You can say that. Say that. Quietly, that government in Nicaragua changed. I'm not saying the change was helped or pushed. But the succeeding government, I'm not saying it's friendly, the succeeding government took steps to withdraw that case and give the United States a clean thing. Speaking from memory, so I may be wrong. So that bit of compliance, I think, please, let us look at it again. But the China-Philippines thing is clear. One country can take a case, a state member of the United Nations, acknowledge the jurisdiction of the court, can submit a case. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of you. Now, what we are going to do is have one last round. 4 persons, I'm seeing 1 hand, 2 hands on this side, and I'll take 2 hands on this side and 1 student hand. So we're going to have a 5 last question, short and sharp. But I just want to quickly refer to something that VC Griffith said earlier. He made mention of the fact that over the last few years, we seem to have lost our media strategy as it relates to our border issues. And we need to talk more, we need to hear more in the public domain about it. Our youth need to know and we need to understand why we have to advance this issue. In addition to that, I also want to refer to something that Brigadier Joe Singh talked about. And he said, when he looked at when he pointed us to the map, what did he ask us? Can you recall? Anyone? He said, do we want to be left with a leg of pork? Remember that? And if Venezuela, if we were to allow them, and if we don't mobilize as Guyanese, that's exactly what's going to happen. And which part of the leg will you be on? That's a question that we have to ask ourselves, and it's a serious question. In addition to that, many of us don't eat pork. So I now open to first the youth, then to the two. Let's take the youth first, and then we come to the two on this side and the other two.
A pleasant good evening to you all. My name is Rayon Doris, student of St. Rose's High. While we are here learning about our borders controversy against Venezuela, our neighbor, we need to share hands. Whilst we trace back, we see that the Geneva Agreement is totally binding on both parties, being Venezuela and Guyana. Now, since there is agreement binding, there's an obligation on both parties to uphold the agreement, rather to say. So from since 1899 to again 1966, we have been again traversing with this controversy. But from 1966, it was, we say, at the ease to say, rather. So from then on, I think our leaders back then should have protected our border, our sovereignty of our nation, because this is not the first time Venezuelans are come over to Guyana on our borders. The issues have been long run. It's not because of the economic depression they're facing for the last 2 years, but it also was back in the years there are Venezuela feel traversely back and forth on our borders, and which created a sense of sovereignty to our land, to our Guyana, right? So future leaders of today, what we need to do is, I'm not saying we need to build a wall like Donald Trump to Mexico, right? What we need to build that sovereignty to our people down in Region 9, that we here on the coastland, we care about them. And even when the Venezuelan president brought ID cards to these people, our nationality people, we should have been there to show them that, hey, we are here, we are Guyanese, and they would have rejected such claims. We need to build sovereignty in our land, and we need to be more stern upon our borders. What am I saying? Putting naval bases there would solve anything? Would it cause war? Adolf Hitler, Germany, anyone could remember Adolf Hitler? A leading autocratic leader, right? He, although his armed forces were small, he had the willpower to stand on violence in 1936, and it put fear in other powerful nations. And what they did nothing. So if we put our soldiers and mark our integrity and our border, we stand at a position to protect what is Guyana. Not a blade of grass we ain't giving up. Thank you very much.
The voice of our youth. Let's have the other two.
My name is Malcolm Embleton.
Just put the mic a little closer, please.
Yes, I am a mediator and also a student at law. Now, when you keep following what Venezuela is insisted on, we find that for some time now they are asking for mediation. And now that the matter has gone to the ICJ, they are now asking for a political decision. I really don't think they know what they really want. For the simple reason, mediation is about win-win situation. Hence, you have an agreement. For you to have an agreement, you have to have an equal advantage to arrive at an agreement, a win-win solution. Now, what kind of option that Venezuela will offer to bring a win-win situation? Equal advantage. They have nothing to offer. Let me read something to you from a former staff of the United Nations. His name is Dr. Martin Dixon, and he wrote in his book, International Law. Notice what he said intently. He said, on the peaceful settlement of disputes, that is the chapter, the ICJ considers the illegitimacy of an orbital award. It is not commenting on the merits of the dispute, but on the legality of the award made. That is what this former staff of the United Nations says. So this tells us that orbital awards always is upheld. There's no appeal for orbital award. And this is what always happens when there's a matter of arbitration. It is upheld, there's no appeal. So I can fairly say that Guyana have a good chance of winning that case with the ICJ. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Good evening. My name is Ayana McCalman. I'm an attorney at law. Ambassador Joseph preempted some of the questions the question I was going to ask about compliance. So I'll shift it a little bit. I would just like to know, given, and this is probably directed to Ambassador George, given some of the cases that you've quoted and your own knowledge and experience, what would you say should be our strategy in dealing with the decision after the ICJ? And I'm presuming, given all of the documentation and so on that you've given us, that we have, as we've been heard, we have a very strong case. But how would we then deal with the whole issue of enforcing that decision in our favor, should it go in our favor? My second question is about, and I'm particularly happy about the presentation from retired General Singh. It was very enlightening for me. But it now raises in my mind even more strongly a concern about security for our both Venezuelans and Guyanese on the border in that area that is being claimed. So again, what should our strategy be given the increasing, I don't know if I probably want to use a word as strong as vitriol, but given the increasing rejection by Venezuela of that particular area, how do we deal with security? Minded that we're sitting on the coast having this conversation, but we have friends and family and brothers and sisters in that area who have to deal with the realities of living in an area that is potentially, can be potentially become increasingly difficult. Those are my two questions about security and compliance if the decision goes in our favor. I just want to offer my comment to say thank you very much to the University of Guyana as well, because it has been very enlightening for me. I've learned much more than I knew about the border issue. So thank you very much.
So thank you very much. We come on this side. There is one here, and the final question at the back. So we have two across here. And the panelists will give responses and closing comments.
Temi Husti, I would use, I say, Vice President of the Guyana Bar Association. Don't get worried. I know what time it is. I know how long we've been here. I just want to make an observation from the nature of the presentations today, particularly for us as younger presenters and particularly for you, the students. There's no substitute for reading and the art of written expression. I hope that Ambassador Joseph's speech is made available to all of us to remind us that it's always good to write. The flow of language that you would have heard today is something that I found missing in traditional presentations. And sometimes it's good to step back for us to move forward. So I just want you to take that from the presentations today. That's an observation.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Board Carter Pension. My question to the panel is, do you feel that the advent of Castro in 1959, followed closely by a possible advent of another guy over here, had anything to do with the dormant...
Sorry, sir.
Sorry.
We're not hearing you clearly. Could you repeat that?
Yeah, sure. I'll speak slowly, clearly, and in English. No, I'm saying that this matter of the border issue with Venezuela was dormant for quite a number of years, from 1899. And then suddenly it came up after independence was on the horizon. And I just wondered if the panel feels that Uncle Sam had a forerun in Donald Trump, in the sense that they thought that it would not be in their interest to have another Marxist on their back door. Do you think that this problem with the Venezuelan issue has its genesis in that belief?
Thank you. So we've had a rich round of questions, and this final response will come from the panelists, and then we'll ask the panelists to briefly summarize. Sorry? Yes. So remember, panelists, you're doing two things. One, you're responding to any question that was thrown out, and then you give your closing remarks at the same time. But please remember, we don't have 15 minutes each.
No, I can do your thing then. I'll speak like this. I won't be looking at you. I will speak like this.
That's what someone did to me.
Okay. Thank you. I will respond first to the question in relation to what should be our strategy. There are two possible outcomes. Of course, Venezuela joins us, we hope, and concludes the process and accepts the award. The signals are that perhaps that will not happen. If that does not happen, indeed, there are some other countries that have gone through the same. I can think about Cameroon, Nigeria, where Nigeria for a number of years refused to remove its military facilities from the territory of Cameroon. I can also think of Cambodia, Thailand. But it's always patience and diplomacy. Because even going to war, if you're powerful states, it doesn't resolve those issues. After a while, Nigeria itself started to quietly withdraw its forces from Cameroonian territory. The interesting thing, though, that there has been a recent case in our region, Colombia and Nicaragua, where Colombia said it was not going to recognize a judgment that she herself participated fully in. Right? But so sometimes these things get resolved, but they get resolved over years. And if there's one thing we can say about Guyana's diplomacy, is that we are very patient and very persistent. Yes. And where we are today is because of those who came before us and those who've continued. My closing remarks basically is to say that, especially in relation to Suriname, our borders are not barriers. And I give you one example. Between 2014 to the first half of 2017, the trade between our two countries was valued somewhere around 53 billion Guyana dollars. And you know what? About 37 billion dollars was in Suriname's favor. So we have a huge deficit with Suriname, in spite of the fact that they are claiming our territory. I'm not saying that we should try to change that. I'm saying that it is important to recognize that we are perhaps their fifth largest trading partner. Bridges again, If it weren't for the 2007 arbitral award, Lisa would not have existed. Lisa is just a few kilometers away from where Suriname itself was claiming. And Exxon would have been even more fearful because of what Suriname did in June 3rd, 2000 in using its gunboats. Would have been even more fearful. So because of the fact we now have a boundary, we can move forward, and Suriname can move forward as CARICOM partners. And those are my closing remarks.
Thank you.
I shall respond to two questions before my substantial closing remarks. The first, about the dormant border between 1899 and 1966. Whether the big power was involved. The answer is yes. The answer is yes. But we are no Sunday school people, you know. We are just as troublesome then as we are now. The British were eager to buy us. Go, go, go. But Kennedy says, no, they're not going to independence under Dr. Jagan. I have Castro here, I don't want another. So, not only the border was dormant, the border was recognized by Venezuela. Venezuela maps, Venezuelan foreign minister, all, some noises here and there. Yes, we have accepted the line as delimited in 1899. Comes 62, well, comes 59, the emergence of Castro, not just Castro in Cuba, but Castro's vision for the export of revolution in South America. South America was very crumbly, very uncertain. Up comes Dr. Jagan, August 1961. And for coincidences, Dr. Jagan was visiting Castro just a short while before President Betancourt was visiting Kennedy. So who are you a friend with? Who are you going to friend with? Also, Betancourt was at that time the only elected head of state in South America. There was another gentleman somewhere, I think Argentina probably. And re-election was coming up. So we were caught in that vortex of being a troublesome colony, but yet Macmillan still playing with us, and not viewing Dr. Jagan as a threat, as any Marxist threat, as Americans do. The British have lived with socialists all their life, no big problem, not the end of the world. So your question or your thinking is right. The other question about strategy, which my colleague answered, what is the strategy? I'm very glad you asked that question, because I can say only just now, I'm still tied up with some peculiar confidentiality. We were exposed to serious entreaties, we call beggings, to continue to seek what's called a negotiated settlement rather than refer the matter to the court, because Venezuela is going to be, all hell is going to break up. We were faced with that question. Mediation and conciliation, has an aspect of, mutuality. I'm not saying support it. It's not a trade union thing where you demand and you get. Mediation and conciliation is to find a middle way. You're not getting all that you ask for, we get some. So they were saying, let us concentrate, continue to push for a negotiated settlement. There's nothing wrong with that. But after 51 years, I'm getting old, how long you keep with this racket? How long? So, very well, question. The strategy. So we are alert. We are aware of certain difficulties, certain problems. We don't know what that may accrue from a referral to the court. The court doesn't settle everything. The court opens up. Everything you do opens up something else. So, as I hinted, there are coming years ahead. And if I can conclude, I want to endorse my colleagues, and I said it earlier, it was a very valuable occasion and a very comfortable occasion. Even though the liquid is anticipate that the 10th Vice Chancellor would have given serious thought to assuage our participation. The 10th. I got it right, eh? Oh, and one other comment. In my comment, which I couldn't continue, I had a marginal note on a point on ExxonMobil. I had a marginal note on known unknowns, and I put in bracket Vice Chancellor, because I know that was a favorite advice, favorite offer by the EC. I didn't intend to use it, but I just kept it in mind when I was there. So I'm very happy to be here, and I find the exchange very rewarding, and particularly from this section, the young people. We had worked on these things when we were young. We have a lot of years on your work. And a final point. A final point. You mentioned about the alertness and the knowledge of Venezuelans about this zona that is seeking out to reclaim. Everybody knows that. And we're still struggling here to keep the message to you. We get accused of more information. Every 6 months you bring out the same thing? Every 6 months? Yes, there's always needs information. Some you have to go and look for. And it's easier now than early days. You can pick up a lot of information. Now, I close on a problem, a serious problem Venezuela has with teaching, indoctrinating, educating its people that Essequibo is theirs. How can they get out of that? How can they get out of that? That, not just the security issues, but that, not just one generation, but 2 or 3 generations of Venezuelans. That is a major issue and a major problem that is informing, conditioning Venezuela's response to a definitive settlement. I'm not making a judgment to right or wrong. I'm telling you a fact. And I'm saying that we are lacking. And since I'm speaking to something organized by the university, we have been told, we don't write anything, Let me be honest with you. I've read a lot of stuff that Venezuelans do, even Jesuits, and I'm amazed at their misrepresentation and blatant lies. But only I know they're lying. They don't know that. See? So, thank you very much. And young people, you'll have a lot more to do. Thank you.
Thank you. I just have one comment on my friend in the front row there who spoke about Germany and the German military might, etc. I just want to share with you, because I noticed from speaking with my own grandchildren, unfortunately social studies and many schools are not really going in too much depth in terms of our history. When I left college in 1964, the population of Guyana is the same as it is now, 54 years later. That tells you something. Secondly, do not forget that when we were a colony, the emphasis was on the coast, the sugar estates, the bauxite industry. The pioneers who went to the interior of gold and diamonds and so on, they pioneered many of those routes, which are now being improved. And we hope eventually they will link us to our neighbors. And we were hit with the oil crisis in the 1970s. I think at that time we had a gross reserve, foreign reserve of nearly $360 million US. In one fell swoop, within a few years that was exhausted. So we really have been on survival. And therefore, the concept of defense was diplomacy, first and foremost, and the military and the police, eyes and ears, developing the linkages with the pork knockers, the lumbermen, the fishermen, and so on, who were frequently out there. And as I said, most of our information on which we then developed our intelligence was provided by ordinary citizens who had a very patriotic fervor, right? The same, literally not a blade of grass. Mr. Levens identifying the Venezuelan flag being run up on our portion of Coco Island. The YYs saying occupation of Camp Ornock in 1968, leading to the incident in 69. So I think you need to recognize that, it's been a very long road and long struggle. And I would close by thanking again Vice Chancellor and Deputy Vice Chancellor Reynolds and the University of Guyana for inviting me on this panel, alongside two very distinguished colleagues who've had the pleasure of working with over several decades. And a takeaway from here, particularly for our young people, but generally throughout the country, education, educating ourselves. As Ambassador Joseph said, you go into Venezuela and you see the maps all over from the time you hit the airport, Zona Reclamación. It is part of their mantra. We have produced a lot of stuff which perhaps need to be republished. I remember very little books produced by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, speeches by Sir Srinath Ramphal, research on Coco Island, and so on. So these we now need to revive and resuscitate that form of education. Secondly, vigilance. And this is not the preserve only of the military and the police. We all have to be vigilant. We all have to recognize, read and listen. And that includes our diaspora, who have access to information which may be very helpful to us and our diplomats. And thirdly, diplomacy. We are blessed, and I don't believe there's anyone who will contradict me. We are blessed with some of the most brilliant minds since independence in terms of the military and the diplomatic corps. And the confidence with which we are pursuing the spurious claim by both of our neighbors will be, in my view, vindicated based on the work that we've already done in getting the maritime boundary with Suriname settled through UNCLOS. And I hope, based on all that we've heard, that the ICJ, whether Venezuela participates or not, will make its ruling, and that it will reinforce what we already know, the validity of the 1899 award. Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen. This conversation has indicated definitely there is the need for further conversations. And those other conversations need to start among us as we sit next to each other, in our classrooms, in our homes, in our communities. You're talking to somebody, you WhatsApping, chatting, what's the other things that you do? But all those things that we do on social and other forms of communication, we need to continue this conversation. I really want to use this opportunity to say that I was pleased to be asked by DVC Reynolds to be a part of the conversation, and I was extremely pleased with the audience in terms of your asking questions, in terms of the diversity of the responses. We had good gender balance in the mix. We have age and youth, which is very good for these conversations. I was also extremely pleased in terms of the discipline exercised by our panelists. And when I say discipline, I'm not speaking of their time, because of course you know who I will give the award to for tonight. But I really want to applaud the discipline in terms of the preparation and the information and the material that was presented, and the diversity as you looked at the different elements of what you all presented. So Ambassador George, thank you very much from me and from University. I know that Norwell is going to be coming to say thanks, but I also want to use this opportunity to say, Ambassador Joseph, Thank you so much for the wealth of knowledge that you continue to share. And Major General Joseph, those maps and pointing us to them, it really brought the whole issue alive, made it real, and it's important. I know that UG, with our Vice Chancellor, will make sure that those things get on our UG website. So please check in with UG website for information. Those who have not typed up, we're more than willing to type it up for you, but whatever you have, I want to say thank you. I just want to leave the couple of key things, the few key things that I have gotten. And I recall what Mr. Husti has said, that we have to read more. I think we've all embraced that. We have to read more and we have to be able to express it more. We all don't do it. Some of us do it better than others. It doesn't matter at this point. To me, we just need to talk that Guyana belongs to us. You understand? And this, we need, if we don't know enough, find out from somebody else. But we need to be alert. No one must come and take what belongs to us. And we don't have all the people, all the resources, all whatever. But what we have and what we need to forge is the unity of purpose on this issue. We have to stand together. Now, the other thing is that we must be vigilant, we must be alert. We heard those messages being said by so many persons. We've got to be, each and every one of us, right? And something that came out too was that patriotic fervor. I remember talking to Vanda Raznik a while back, and Vanda said one of the things that she learned years ago, that no matter what, you believed that Guyana, is the best place to be, and you have to do it for Guyana. We have to get that feeling again, that we must do this for Guyana. It's not about you, it's not about me. It's about the legacy that we want to leave for our children and our grandchildren. Diplomacy, we've been doing it. There is now another place for that international engagement, and it's the International Court of Justice. We're going to go there, and we are going to go of one accord. When you go of one accord, you stand strong. But we have to have confidence to know that we can do it. Can we do it? Yes, yeah, man, we can. Thank you all very much.
We have a tradition at the University of Guyana of not just asking people to join us, but expressing our appreciation in tangible ways. And at this time, I'd like to ask the PIE team to express our tangible appreciation to the presenters and to Ms. Henry, knowing that this in no way compensates for the effort. Thank you so much. All the same time. Before we have the formal appreciation from the president of the UG Student Society, I just want to draw your attention to some upcoming events and ask that you save the dates in your calendars. On February 27, we shall have the 7th Vice Chancellor's Renaissance Lecture. His Excellency, the Ambassador of China to Guyana, will join us at the Education Lecture Theatre, and he will focus on the Belt and Road Initiative of China. On March 1, the online applications are open. The significance of this is a nod, a recognition that UG is no longer just bound by Tain, Turkine, and Johns, but there are opportunities for us to use the technology at our disposal. Very interestingly for me, and I hope for you, on Tuesday, March 27, we will have the third conversation on law and society, and His Honor, Mr. Justice General Singh, will make a presentation as his first formal presentation as our distinguished jurist in residence on the constitutional guarantee of fundamental rights and the citizen. I think that although Justice Singh just left, we can be assured that this will be a very interesting presentation. On March, on a date to be determined, the 12th Turkine and Tain Talks will be held, and it will focus on race and the future of Guyana. On Saturday, March 31, those of you who don't mind being banged and bruised, the Race for Pace will take place at the Guyana Motor Racing and Sports Club. I understand that the Vice Chancellor participated in this the last time. I am not sure if he won a prize, but we do look forward to your joining us here. He did, apparently. And then on May 2022, a very important milestone for the university. Some of you may know that the university launched the School of Entrepreneurship and Business Innovation at the beginning of the last semester. And part of the thrust of that business school is to enable not just students of the University of Guyana, but the public at large, particularly young entrepreneurs who need guidance and insights and opportunities to develop their craft, to come to the school, to the Center for Entrepreneurship and Business Innovation, and to be able to develop. And the school will have its first entrepreneurship conference on May 20 to 22, and I encourage you to share this information with those who are not here. After the formal appreciation, we will go out on not a blade of grass. If you want to dance, dance. If you want to sing, sing. And then I invite you to continue the conversation with some refreshment on the outside. And as Ms. Henry said, over dinner and breakfast and weddings and funerals and christenings and in the office and in the marketplace. So we came. We are people who are 3 persons per square mile. 3 persons. If we stretched out our hands, we probably will not be a ribbon along the coast. But what's important for us from this session is that at school we need to learn history, geography, and civics. We need to sing our national songs and recite our national poetry and retell our national fables and eat Guyanese food and export some of it. We need to crisscross these 83,000 square miles and learn about our country beyond the coast of Guyana. We need to walk through the rivers and cross the hills, and I hope that those of us who can still walk and run and climb will do so. And I speak particularly of our young people. It is time for us to claim our country, because if we don't, somebody else will. And so, thank you very much for coming, and I ask the president of our UGSSS to do the formal appreciation.
Thank you, DVC. All protocols established. I won't repeat that, except to recognize, of course, in addition to being the Minister of Public Security, Minister Ramjatan is also second Vice President, so I also want to extend our thanks for him being here. In terms of extending appreciation, I had to think about what I wanted to say after listening to the presentations on behalf of the university family. I reflected on a visit I made to Ethiopia in 2015, and I want to share first 3 things that I learned there. The first has to do with patrimony and pride in patrimony that I learned from the Ethiopian people. As you know, Ethiopia in the Bible, you notice Abyssinia was not colonized, and that is significant because it says something about the spirit of the people there and their understanding of patrimony. their national patrimony, their natural patrimony, as well as their inherited patrimony. And a lot of our conversation tonight was about that inherited patrimony. The second was about the various worldviews and the sort of duality of worldviews, the Afrocentric worldview, a Eurocentric worldview. And there in Ethiopia, I had met some young people from Uganda, and they were talking of a story that's always on the news, where I think a goat herd or something like that would have his goats always going into other people's land and grazing and eating grass. And every time they interviewed the man on the TV, he would say, "But what do you mean that they own the land? Who owns the land? I mean, the land is continuous and connected. Nobody owns the land." So this idea of ownership of land, of a piece of land being cut out and owned by a person or a group of people, is not necessarily part of the Afrocentric worldview. However, the Afrocentric worldview does not dominate in our current context. And therefore, that other idea that it is important to define, demarcate, and tell the story of your ownership of land is very important. And I learned that there too. And the third was the history of, that history is told by young people, which seems strange because usually you tell young people the stories, but it is the young people who really tell the story as the inhabitants of the world. And that usually also those older folks are the history. So those three things that I wanted to share. So as I list here some people to extend our appreciation to, the university family, I wanted to start first with His Excellency himself, because I think that more than the issue of resolving the border issue, what we are appreciative of is the commitment to prioritize our patrimony. And I think that that is a significant thing to appreciate. The second thing is the University of Guyana, of course, the leadership of the Vice Chancellor himself on this issue. And I'm a little embarrassed, I don't see a lot of UG students here. It's a little embarrassing, but we have to do better to get UG students here because it's very important. And I would encourage also that we do the type of things, the podcast style. I know that that's coming on stream also, the live streaming, and it's available even in classes. These things need to be in the classrooms. But of course, the leadership of the Vice Chancellor and the team in PIE that organized this, the DVC Reynolds herself and her team that organized this. There's a longer list of persons, but it's at the back of your program. In the interest of time, I'm not going to repeat it, but please refer to the back of your program, and there's a longer list. The students who participated in this conversation, in particular, I was impressed with the questions. As an older student and a post-student myself, very impressed with the questions. And particularly some points that came out there, the points about solidarity and sovereignty. Solidarity among the peoples of Guyana. Of course, the MC, a colleague also, Ms. Paulette Henry, we both are on the board. She's the chair of the board of the Guyana Lands and Survey Commission. A member of the board, I see the executive, the CEO, and commissioner is also here. And I am learning a lot about land issues and the idea that there is land that we have to protect under the sea, under waterways. This idea of hydrographic concerns. So this is very interesting because this is connected directly to what we've been talking about a lot tonight. Of course, our speakers. Major General Joe Singh, always refreshing, always wonderful to hear from, and particularly spoke about areas of opportunity. Even as we consider this challenge, he spoke a lot about areas of opportunity. Ambassador George, of course, always wonderful, and his staff even assisted me directly with things when I had to do some work last year there in Suriname, and always wonderful. And the particular points about a quote that we must note: once established, a boundary stands. And this is a question of stability in the law, and I think that that's very important for us to recognize. I have many points from Ambassador Cedric Joseph, but I will say only that I think that I might have found if not totally, part of the answer to the question the DVC asked, what does extraordinary and plenipotentiary mean? And I want to prefer what I think might be. Now, my understanding of English, I think that extraordinary, if I break it down, has something to do with not subscribed or beyond usual measure. So, extraordinary. And plenipotentiary having to do something with having, we break it down for the students, plenty, a lot of, so a lot of, many, and potentiary powers. So we have a lot of powers from a man who is not easily measured, that is perhaps unmeasurable. And one of his powers that we see demonstrated here is the ability to stop time. So we want to extend our deepest appreciation to our panel of speakers, and especially to Ambassador Joseph, who has demonstrated that even in his youth, he has tremendous intellectual clarity. So I want to thank all of you for your... Oh, I also recognize my high school teacher, Miss Valère. I just looked over there and saw Miss Valère. So thank you very much for coming. You've been an incredible audience. Thank you for the opportunity. And on behalf of the family, do enjoy the refreshments.
Conquering hero. Nobody doubted your